Even though most analysts knew there were thousands of Soviet troops in Afghanistan, last week's coup d'etat caught most of them by surprise. Maybe it shouldn't have, because at least in hindsight, there were plenty of indications of what the Soviets were contemplating. In New Delhi, Bruce Dunning reports.
By all accounts, the Soviet takeover was meticulously planned and skillfully executed. But it has not been clear just how the Soviets were able to set up their coup without the Afghans realizing what they had in mind. Now, a member of a well-placed and influential Afghan family has fled to India, and because of his family's position, was able to give journalists the most detailed account so far. The first crucial move took place a week before Christmas. President Amin was living here at the center of Kabul in a former royal palace now called the People's House. The Russians persuaded Amin to move to an isolated hilltop palace on the outskirts of Kabul, not far from their embassy. Their excuse was that he would be safer there, well away from the city. But the move was intended to cut Amin off from contact with his government, and especially with Afghan army commanders. That gave the Russians a free hand as they began their massive airlift of men and equipment. The Russians also managed to lure Afghan guards away from key installations with promises of new equipment. The guards were then executed, the source said. On the night of the coup, the Russians moved a large force of armored vehicles, like the one still patrolling Kabul, out to the president's isolated palace. The Afghan defenders and the Russian attackers fought bitterly for almost 4 hours, and according to the Afghan source, casualties on both sides were heavy. The presidential palace was gutted. Amin was captured, given a quick midnight trial, and executed. Within 2 days, the source said, about 20,000 people were arrested, herded into makeshift jails. The new president, Karmal, has not been seen in public, but the source said Afghan army officers report seeing him and receiving orders from him, the most solid indication so far that Karmal is indeed in Kabul. This source also estimates that 40,000 Russian troops had been moved into the country by last weekend. The Soviets are moving units out to other parts of the country where there are reports of heavy fighting against the Soviet forces. Even in Kabul, which seems calm, there are reports of sporadic firefights and grenade explosions. And the Afghan source wistfully and proudly remarked that anti-Soviet Muslim guerrillas and anti-Soviet army units, both at home in the desolate Afghan mountains, will make it almost impossible for the Soviets to impose their will totally on the country. The Soviet move has thrown this part of the world into turmoil. Pakistan, which once saw Afghanistan as a buffer against the Soviet Union, is now terrified that it will be the next target for the Soviet troops. And India is desperately afraid that the United States will overreact and give massive amounts of military equipment to Pakistan, its longtime enemy. Bruce Dunning, CBS News, New Delhi.